Hey folks, welcome back to the Husker Big Red YouTube channel and the podcast here. I'm Chris Peterson of HuskerBigRed.com, and joining me as always is my co-host Danny Gillette of thegreatcornholio.org. And we're coming to you a little bit late this week. It's Friday, but perfect time to wrap up the 2023 recruiting class and everything that happened since National Signing Day on Wednesday. But we'll start with Danny. How you doing this morning?
Well, it's going to be minus 15 degrees in my area this weekend, so I'm going to be a little cold, but other than that, I'm doing all right.
We went through the minus last weekend, but yeah,
Ugh.
that's a little tough.
Yeah, no, I am very much looking forward to spring and the spring game and football and warmer weather, that's for sure.
Yeah, so I mean, it was another great week for Nebraska, football recruiting. They wrapped up the 2023 class on Wednesday. Giandre Barnes, the number 10th ranked player in the state of Colorado, wound up signing. They signed four other guys in the late signing period, a bunch of transfers, 28 recruits total in this class. I believe there's 24th in the team composite rankings for 24/7 Sports right now. 39 guys total with all the transfers. Matt Rhule talked about it, quite a bit on Wednesday, but it was a really solid class, especially with the late timing that he arrived. Look at Wisconsin and Colorado. Nebraska's ranked well ahead of those teams. Colorado's a little closer because they got the 5-star in Cormani McLean. But what are your final kind of thoughts and impressions on this 2023 class signed by Matt Rhule and the coaching staff?
To be honest with you, I'm just happy that everybody signed on the dotted line Wednesday and that we have a lot of guys in the fold. I thought Barnes was another great addition. We have three great corners in the class, in Barnes, Safula, and Dwight Boodle. So I think the corner position and that corner group is going to be a really strong, kind of underrated and overlooked position group. And we've had, some success with corners in the past and in recent memory. So I'm really excited to see, what they do in this defense. And I think it's a solid group to build off of. And some may say, "Oh well, you only need one corner to compete, one solid corner, and the rest whatever." If you want to build a winning program, you need multiple layers of solid people like Clemson and Ohio State. If a starter gets injured, it's the next man up, and that's a highly rated recruit. So we kind of need those layers positionally, and I think the corner position is going to be really great overall. I think it's a really solid class, really strong class. It's hard to believe that they were ranked in the 60s. The class was before Rhule got hired, and so I'm just really happy to see them all sign and really excited to see how it all comes together.
Yeah, they did a really great job with Barnes. It was interesting. Satterfield, it was kind of an old school type thing. He, talked to a old high school coach, and the coach said they got a player that's kind of under the radar, and Satterfield went there, and Barnes took his visit, and it was kind of an old school, recruiting pickup for the Huskers. But really, it's interesting to me since early signing day, Nebraska's basically added, not just five but seven guys, because they picked up, Ethan Nation, Cameron Leonard, Ishmael Smith Flores, Barnes, Demetrius Bell, all those guys. So they really closed strong in this kind of late signing period. I remember we were talking about it. We didn't know if they were going to be done or not in the late period. And I always thought that Rhule was going to be active, and most of the time teams are when they've got new head coaches. And I just thought that they did a good job of identifying more players in that late period, and then really doing a good job of closing. I mean, almost if you look back since Matt Rhule was hired, almost every recruit that's come to campus on an official visit has wound up signing with Nebraska. I mean, at least in the 2023 class, I know Benny Nogi, obviously stuck with his commitment to Iowa State, but there's not many others that I know. There was a couple of transfers that obviously didn't go our way, but in terms of the 2023 recruiting class, I'm kind of blanking on guys that actually came in for a visit once Rhule was in place that didn't wind up in Nebraska. I don't know. There's not very many.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking myself, and I don't think there's very many at all. So they're very good at being able to, seal the deal. And I thought it was interesting. Rule mentioned, in his press conference, I want coaches to visit 8 schools a day because that's what we need to do. It's nothing special. He saw the kind of buzz around him visiting 8 schools a day and the staff working hard, and he basically said along the lines of that's our job. And you could tell that he really means it and he wants to be a part of this community. And I think Ed Foley visited something like 75 schools so far. So, he's not just talking the talk. Rule and his staff are also walking the walk.
Yeah, I think it's setting the expectation, that this is what, we should be doing on a yearly basis. And he said we should be recruiting well at a place like Nebraska, and I do think that that's true. And this 2024 class I'm looking at, because they've got to get that blue chip ratio up. The number of 4-star recruits on this roster, and I definitely think that can happen. I definitely think Nebraska can be somewhere where they're signing 50% of the kids that they're signing are rated as 4-star recruits or better. I mean, I just think that that's possible. I'm not saying that Nebraska is going to be signing multiple 5-star kids every cycle. That's not what Nebraska is. I mean, if you look at the college football playoff era. I mean, there's 5 schools that have signed a ton of 5-stars: Georgia, Bama, Clemson, Ohio State, all those kind of the usual partners, LSU. And Nebraska is really not one of those programs, and that's okay. You don't have to be, but if you can get Dylan Raiola and then add some other guys, that would be a game changer going forward. And I do think that this team can put up top 15 recruiting classes, and I think that's what's going to be needed to make the playoff. And it's obviously next year, I think, is the last year of the 14 playoffs, so we're going to 12 teams, and Nebraska's going to have a good shot at that. And honestly, I truly believe this is a bold prediction, but I believe within 5 years Nebraska is going to be in the college football playoff, the 12-team one. I believe that 100% with Matt Rhule.
I don't think it's too bold a prediction, and at the rate we're going, I'd say maybe the next 3 to 4, not even 5. But I'm really impressed with what the staff has been able to do and how they've been able to work. And also in his press conference, Rule mentioned Xavier Betts, and he made it very clear that he not only wants to help Betts on the field but also in the classroom. And I think that speaks to the development portion. And also Rule mentioned family a lot in his introductory press conference when he was first hired, and I think that kind of, connects back to that as well. So I think we're seeing a lot of the things that Rule talked about, in play right now, and it's not just, hyperbole or something to, get the fans excited. I think he's really trying to follow through on, what he said at the podium back in November.
Yeah, it's interesting. He comes off as a great guy, but he's a tough guy. And these guys are, one thing I caught, one quote that I really liked, is he said, we'll give anybody one spring to figure out, if they want to be here or not. And to me, that sounds like, if Xavier Betts and these guys want to be here in the fall, they're going to have to go through a tough ass spring. And I think that's what we're going to see at Nebraska. And that's what we should see. If these guys, I mean, it's time to cut through the fat, so to speak. And if the guys don't want to be at the program and they aren't cutting it, then they need to retire. They have that option. And I think that's going to be utilized, because this team needs to get rid of about 20 scholarship players from now until August. And, so I think that process is going to start, in the spring. And I think we're going to see a lot more roster movement. I hopefully, we see some more, positive transfer movement too. I do think if Nebraska gets a chance to add an offensive lineman or add a pass rusher, something like that in that spring, transfer portal window, I think they would definitely take advantage of that, because this recruiting class is a really solid class, but it's there's a lot of big numbers. And at the end of the day, I think there's only 6 guys ranked in the top 500. So I mean, there is work to do, and the key thing about this class is going to be development. And Matt Rhule has made a lot of, I guess, money, and a lot of headway in his career finding these athletes. He talked about that at the press conference. Finding guys that can triple jump 40 some feet, and sprinters, and he can find positions for those guys and turn them into football players. And that's what they're going to have to do in this class, because if you look just on the rankings, I mean, there's a lot of high upside guys, but there's guys that this coaching staff is going to have to really develop and help them reach that ceiling of a 4-star recruit and that type of thing.
I'm very curious as to where all the wide receivers will go because there are a lot of wide receivers. And so obviously I think personally that some of them may change positions, but there's a lot of names at the position, and that's not a bad thing. I'm just curious to see where all of these guys go. If they, you know, go into the spring, they figure out Nebraska's not for them, or they might transfer or something like that, or if they decide to switch positions. And I think what you're seeing there is, not just they may be under the wide receiver label, but you're seeing a lot of athletes. And so I think, we might see some in the secondary, we might see some defensively, we might see some in certain situations. Who knows? But I'll be curious to see, what happens there with so many mouths to feed hypothetically.
Yeah, and I mean Malachi Coleman's one of those guys. I mean, he dominated at wide receiver in the Polynesian Bowl, but I mean that guy could be a first round pick as an edge rusher too. I mean, he's got the exact frame. You see a lot of edge rushers that were former wide receivers. He's got the length. I mean, I absolutely believe that Matt Rhule could, turn him into a first round pick on either side of the ball. I mean, I truly believe that with Malachi Coleman. I think he's going to be a first round pick, and I thought it was great how he dominated down in that game after some of the unfair criticism that he's gotten from some on Husker Twitter, and it's just, which is really annoying. And we all know we're talking about Husker One. But it was awesome to see that, and I'm just excited to see a lot of these guys. Bryce Turner was talked about, and Matt Rhule talked about him being among the fastest players in America and being a guy that's 6'2". Jalen Lloyd, Jaden Doss. I mean, there's just a bunch of guys like that who can run and jump, and those are things that you can't teach. That you can't coach. I mean, you can teach a guy how to coach a football, how to rush the passer, but you can't teach those raw athletic traits. And hopefully, I mean, Nebraska's betting on that a lot in this class, but Matt Rhule's had a lot of success with that formula, and there's no reason to doubt that he can make that work again with this group.
When you look at some of the, wide receivers that we've had in the past, there were Scott Frost favorites. I won't mention any names, but there were Scott Frost favorites, and you kind of watched the game, and you were thinking, or at least I was thinking, okay, player X can do this, but what else can he do? What upside does he bring? And a lot of times, there wasn't a lot of upside at the wide receiver position. With this speed group, I think there's a lot of upside not only at the wide receiver position, but also maybe in other areas as well. As you mentioned, for example, Malachi Coleman potentially being a good fit at defensive end. But I think, I'd rather have the upside with speed than to just trot out players in the past like we have, that are coaches' favorites. And, I'd rather, and I think Matt Rhule even said this too, I'd rather miss on speed than, miss on, miss on, pure talent. And I think a lot of these kids that we're seeing today, in this class in particular, have some sort of talent. It's just about finding out where they fit best.
Yeah, and Jeremiah Charles is a guy that comes to mind. Only played 1 year of high school football. Nebraska offered him after he had 4 dunks in a basketball game. I love guys that can play basketball, that have those hops, because it's an explosive game. I mean, if you're going to be a good basketball player, you got to be able to get up and get to the rim, and those are things that can really help defensive backs and tight ends. And Nebraska's got 2 of those guys, because Ishmael Smith Flores, another guy, 6'5", 210, played tight end, played some wide receiver for Bob Wager. I'm really excited about Ishmael Smith Flores. I would say in the early period, we talked a bunch about Eric Fields, the linebacker, and he's a guy that's got me really excited. I think can play early, and I feel like Ishmael Smith Flores, there's a lot of parallels. I know he's only played 1 year of football, but I feel like Bob Wager is going to get him up to speed, and I feel like Nebraska really got a steal with this kid.
Out of all the transfers that we've landed, so far, and I think we could kind of maybe revise the answer because I believe I've asked this before, but which one is your favorite? Because there's a lot of names, and I was thinking about this the other day, and I have one in mind, but I want to hear what you have to say.
Mine's Jeff Sims. I just think to go out and get Nebraska needed another quarterback. It's not an issue anything with Casey Thompson. Matt Rhule said it yesterday. Casey has played really well last season. He just has to stay healthy. But Nebraska couldn't have another season that was like solely based on the health of Casey Thompson like it was last year. I mean, honestly, if Casey doesn't get hurt, I think that Mickey Joseph gets this team to a bowl game. I mean, at least they had a pretty good shot, because there were Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota. If Casey was just perfectly healthy in those games, I think they could have won. And so I thought that Jeff Sims just solidified the position. It gives Nebraska, a multi-year starter, a guy that's been successful, in the ACC, is a great fit for this offense. And it's the game's most important position. And it was a disaster, under Scott Frost. I mean, despite, a lot of production from Adrian Martinez, it was a disaster, a total disaster. And so I think to get a proven starter like Jeff Sims and is a guy that Matt Rhule said the sky's the limit for him, on the Thursday. So I feel like he was the number one target for me just because of the need at the quarterback position for Nebraska.
And there was a solid first layer at the quarterback position under Scott Frost, but beyond that, there wasn't really a whole lot to speak of. And I think for me, my most impactful transfer would be Arik Gilbert, just because we don't know what we're going to get out of the tight end position yet in terms of Fedoni, Rollins, and Carney. Not saying that they're going to be bad players, but they've just been unfortunately bitten by the injury bug. So I think adding a veteran to that tight end room in Gilbert will definitely help. And we heard Rhule kind of you know talk about him on Wednesday, and he gave him extremely high praise. So I think I'm excited to see what Gilbert can do, and his frame 6'5" will be very useful in the red zone. So I'm definitely excited about Gilbert, and I do think he brings a lot to the room, if nothing else, to kind of um, allow the big three, like I just mentioned, Fedoni, Rollins, Carney, to kind of ease into things instead of rushing into a situation. Because yes, I know fans will say, well, they've been here X amount of years, they should be ready to go. If they're hurt, no matter what, they're not going to be ready to go. And we can't necessarily rely on them in terms of health to be ready. So I think Gilbert kind of bridges that gap.
Yeah, and if you think about this offense with Marcus Washington out there, Billy Kemp, Malachi Coleman, I think Jaden Doss is going to make an impact this year. Xavier Betts, and then you got Gilbert and Thomas Fedoni, AJ Allen, Anthony Grant, Jeff Sims, Casey Thompson. I mean, that's a pretty solid depth chart to feel good about. I mean, there's a lot of explosive guys. You look at, I mean, Malachi Coleman, 6'5", Gilbert, 6'5", Fedoni about 6'4", 6'5". Marcus Washington is, I think he's about 6'2", but still had a lot of really good explosive plays down the field last season. Billy Kemp is a guy that I think a lot of Nebraska fans are going to underrate. I think he's going to be a really popular transfer, is just kind of that slot guy that can make a lot of catches, sure-handed, not dropping passes, the guy that Nebraska can look to on third downs. I think this offense has a chance to be really good if some of these guys can kind of, develop. And Matt Rhule, obviously, you look at the size and speed. I mean, Arik Gilbert was a 5-star recruit for a reason. I mean, there was a reason he, was so highly touted after that first year at LSU. And if somebody can just get the most out of that kid, he has first round ability. And Fedoni's the same way. He's been hurt with the injury bug. He's looking good. But if those guys can make some kind of contribution, and if Malachi Coleman can come and contribute this season, which I don't see why not. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me one iota if he was starting opposite Marcus Washington game one. I mean, just that's a lot of talent to throw the football to. I think I said it when they landed Malachi on signing day, but maybe Jeff Sims and Casey Thompson were probably as happy as anyone, and those additions have kind of continued here through the transfer portal with Gilbert and Billy Kemp, who I do think is going to be one of the most underrated pieces. Ben Scott obviously is another big addition. Adding him in there, Jacob Hood, is a solid guy that's going to compete for time this year, and I think that they solidified some needs, and I feel really great about this roster. Except I'd like to see, maybe another edge rusher, maybe like a true nose tackle, and look at another offensive lineman. I don't think they could go wrong there, but there's a lot of things to feel good about, I think, with this offensive and defensive roster heading into this season.
And I think MJ Sherman can help solidify things on the edge a little bit when you talk about, that pass rushing ability. I think he can kind of help bring that to the table. And, um, I think there is a lot of balance in this class. There were a lot of areas covered that needed to be covered in this class. And I'm excited to see it all kind of, unfold. And sure, it's not much in terms of, you know, focused football, so to speak. But the spring game will just be a good chance for the fans to see the roster and kind of how it shakes out. I mean, last year we didn't really see a ton offensively because they didn't really get into much, but it was a good chance to see. I thought more defensively, kind of the players that we can expect to make a big jump. And for me, last year, I thought Garrett Nelson played really well in the spring game, and that correlated to the regular season because he had a very solid regular season as well.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see the format. I'm expecting to see, a real football game. I think Trev Alberts talked about that, and that kind of strikes me as what Matt Rhule wants to do. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how all these guys kind of meld in. All the transfers are on campus. There's no more, kind of drama with those guys as there was with Walter Rouse. I mean, that's kind of the one that still stings from the transfer portal. I wish we had got. I'd feel a lot better about the offensive line with him. So hopefully, there's another guy out there that Nebraska can snag in the late window, but it's kind of unlikely, to get. I mean, he had what 30 some starts or 39 starts or whatever it was at Stanford. So that one still I feel like stings for Nebraska, but I mean, you look at this roster and yeah, MJ Sherman, I think Chief Borders is going to, come in and help this team. I do think Eric Fields is going to get some snaps with Reimer and blanking on our other linebacker right now.
I am too. Reimer and anyway,
Yeah.
I'll come to it and it'll
Yeah,
that's
it'll
gonna bug
come.
me.
But yeah, in the secondary, you got a lot of pieces. Back in the secondary from last season, you have both of your starting corners. So it's really about the pass rush, and it's being able to protect and affect the quarterback. Something that Matt Rhule talked about the first day that he was at his press conference. If Nebraska can do that next season, I really feel good about this team. I really do. I think Matt Rhule's going to be, I'm sorry with my Michigan references, but I think he's going to be Nebraska's Jim Harbaugh. I really do. I think people are going to be surprised with how good that this team is next year because I think the talent level is better than people expect or realize. I think that Scott Frost was just a horrible, horrible coach, and he had no idea how to get the best out of this program. And so I really think that this team's going to surprise people next season.
I agree, and I think that you mentioned a name like Luke Reimer. We're forgetting about the players that have already been on the roster. Reimer had you know 85 tackles last season, 86 tackles actually, excuse me, and then he had 90 tackles in 2021. So there's a track record of success there, and I think combined with what is coming in with what we already have on the roster, Reimer, for example, is one of my favorite players to watch defensively. He just attacks. He's always near the football. He goes, after the running backs. He tries very hard, and I'm excited to see how the old will mesh with the new, so to speak, because I think it's going to be a very good combination.
And Nick Heinrich is the guy we were trying to think of
There we
before.
go.
So he was hurt last year.
It's
He's
early.
expected back, in a starting role. But Ty Robinson's going to be back next year. There is a lot of talented, guys. Hutchmaker is going to be back. The guy that transferred from Alabama, on the defensive line. So I mean, there are some solid pieces back on this defense. I feel like Stephon Wynn was the name I was thinking of. I was just trying to blank there, but there's a lot of guys that are back that this isn't like, you're rebuilding from the studs on this defense. And, he talked about it too, like the effort they showed, winning at Iowa. I mean, that was a great win for this team. I mean, they could have totally quit on the season and, just got their asses kicked, but they wanted to send out the seniors the right way and, Mickey Joseph the right way. And so that was really great to see. But, Miles Farmer, I mean, Isaac Gifford is a guy that had 70 tackles last season. And, I feel like that the staff will put him in I wouldn't mind seeing him be like a linebacker, an actual linebacker instead of a nickel, but we'll see how that works out. But overall, I mean, I feel like that this defense has more talent on it than people realize, and I feel like with the right coaching, I feel like they have a chance to be pretty good. So we'll see how it all shakes out. I do think that with this 2023 class, it's more about the future than immediate success. But I do think that there are guys that are going to contribute immediately. Malachi Coleman. I think that Jaden Doss has a good chance to get out there. I wouldn't count out, Prince William Amalian and Cameron Leonard. More toward, it takes defensive linemen a little bit, so I wouldn't expect like right away with those guys. But near the end of the season, it wouldn't surprise me if they, were able to contribute. Eric Fields is a guy I think can have an opportunity right away. And honestly, the guy we talked to last week, I think Tristan Ovano, it wouldn't shock me if he was, the kicker at the start of the next season, or at least, handling the kickoff duties.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all. I mean, Alvano's got a hell of a leg, and and again, Ed Foley, watched his film and said, "I'm not going to let the guy leave the state," and they didn't. And that's the type of recruiting that we need for future classes as well. Because like we mentioned earlier on here, there's a lot of talent in the state in the coming seasons. So I think honestly, and you mentioned Alvano, I think he could be a very underrated commit, and because we've had decent success kicking in recent years. Connor Culp had a great season one year before kind of I don't know getting the yips the next year, and so I think having Alvano in the fold to kind of develop and hopefully produce at a high level is going to be important because honestly I think special teams in terms of field goals and kicking and things like that were okay. I thought that was one of the kind of the pleasant surprises of last season. So hopefully that can carry over.
So we've kind of covered 2023. It's maybe we can start looking ahead now to 2024. And I know with Nebraska fans, that basically right now begins and ends with Dylan Raiola. We've got our other guys that we really like, but I think there was some positive kind of news with Dylan Raiola this week on a couple of fronts. He and his dad both talked a lot about Nebraska and the coaches, and he talked about how much it meant to him to have all 9 Nebraska assistant coaches there. Nobody else has done that, and he talked about how this coaching staff was on a mission. I can't remember if that was him or his dad, but Dylan Raiola talked about how this program is set up to win, and I think like he trusts Matt Rhule to deliver a winning program in Nebraska. That doesn't mean that he's going to come, but you've got Todd Monken is the offensive coordinator at Georgia, right? And he's interviewed with the Vikings and the Buccaneers this week. So that's kind of an interesting thing because it always makes it tough, if you're trying to recruit somebody and you lose your offensive coordinator and you don't know what the system's going to be. I'm not saying that that's going to be, something that's impossible for Georgia to overcome. Obviously, Kirby Smart, has a lot of sway and all the success they've had and all that. But it's still, if Raiola's making a decision in March, it's not ideal from their perspective. We've talked about USC and Malachi Nelson and why that having him in the 2023 class could affect Dylan Raiola. And another thing too is it sounds like because Donovan Raiola's on staff, Sean Callahan kind of reported that it wouldn't be surprising to see the Raiolas make a visit to Nebraska, which wouldn't be against the rules, even though it is a dead period because of that family tie. So I think there's a few things kind of trending in Nebraska's way. And I feel better about Dylan Raiola than I did a couple of weeks ago. And I keep feeling better and better. And whatever Nebraska's doing, whether they win this recruitment or not, they're doing all the right things. And that's all you can do. As a coaching staff, and I feel like they're doing everything the way that they're supposed to with Dylan Raiola.
I don't want to get my hopes up, but March is coming quick, and that's supposedly the month when he's going to decide. And yeah, you can't say that the Nebraska football coaching staff is not trying hard because they certainly are. And it's one thing to miss out on a top prospect, but really push hard for him in his recruitment. It's another thing, like in previous regimes, to not even try with a top prospect and completely miss out on him because he just didn't give a crap. And I don't think that's Matt Rhule. I think he's trying hard to, land Raiola, and the staff is trying hard to land Raiola. Marcus Satterfield has visited him a couple times, and so, I'm really excited with the way we're trending as well. And I think honestly, if Monken leaves for the NFL, that could be a huge blow to Georgia for this recruitment. And we'll have to see how it goes. But they were also, I believe, visiting another 2024 quarterback from Connecticut, whose name I can't remember at the moment, but that could also work in Nebraska's favor as well. I'll try to see if I can look it up, but
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, with the quarterback board, I think it's going to be Raiola, and then I think it's Daniel Kalen. If they don't get Raiola, I think they're going all in on Daniel Kalen. That's just my reality. And I could totally be wrong on that. That's the thing with recruiting is you kind of have to see how things develop and play out, and you can see how the board, basically you can guess how the board is shaping up on how much coaches are visiting and contact. I mean, you can tell obviously when they send every single assistant coach to go see Dylan Raiola, he's the number one target because they haven't done that with anybody. But there's a lot of other guys too that that are going to be key targets. Carter Nelson's going to be a guy we're going to hear a lot about. He's up to 20 offers now. We've talked about Damon Hall, or Davon Hall out of Bellevue there. there's just a lot of guys in this area. Andrew Sprague's a guy out of Kansas City that getting into Missouri. We've seen Rhule there, and I think it's interesting when you look at this. This late period, Nebraska, they didn't sign any guys basically in the state. There was Demetrius Bell out of Tennessee. They got a couple of guys out of Texas. They got a guy out of California. So I think it's interesting to see them kind of spread their wings a little bit recruiting wise. And Tennessee's an area that's really kind of blowing up recruiting, especially in that Nashville area of the St. Louis area too, and Kansas City. So it would be great for Nebraska to kind of target those as secondary areas along with Nebraska, Texas, and I think Pennsylvania would be another hotbed for them.
Chicago would be good too. There's some athletes in Chicago, and I think the first signing period where they kind of I think they probably just wanted to focus on, tying up any loose ends. Let's try to keep the players that this program previously recruited in the class if we want them. Let's make sure that we establish that in-state presence right off the bat. Let's make sure that, we get a couple transfers in there to address positions we need. Now that we have it all done and all set, we can use this second recruiting period to kind of spread our wings and branch out to other recruiting areas and try to establish connections there. So I think it was a very calculated couple of periods, and I think this signing period in particular could be more indicative of some areas this program is going to focus on in the future.
Yeah, definitely, and it's going to be really important, I think, for Nebraska to get off to a strong start. We've seen the hashtag, own 24 or 24 is ours or whatever, and they really do need to get off to a strong start and getting. Obviously Dylan Raiola commitment would be huge, but there's some really good players in the state of Nebraska too that they've got to make sure that they get. Not just Hall. But I like I said, Carter Nelson to me, he's the number one player in the state. He's 188 right now, but he's going to be ranked higher than that. He's just to me, he's a must land target. He's almost right there with Dylan Raiola in terms of where he stacks on my board. And they have to lock down the state of Nebraska, and I think they've taken all the steps to do that. I think that the best players in Nebraska are going to go to Nebraska, and I really don't. I think it's going to be a surprise when like a top player doesn't sign with the Huskers. I really believe that. I don't think we're going to see many of those. I think we're as strong as last year's class was in terms of in-state recruits. I think this year's class is going to be even better in terms of a higher hit rate on the top ranked kids in the state, because a few got away last year, and I don't think that's going to happen in 2024.
And it's coming at a perfect time too, because right now we're seeing, like we mentioned before, a tremendous influx of talent in the state. So this is coming at a really good time. And Matt Rhule even said he was upset with himself for letting some of the kids, get away from the program. And so I'm excited to see what they do with this 2024 class and how they continue to establish those connections in state, because I think the in-state pipeline is going to be massive, and I think it's also been important and had tremendously good players in other seasons. We just, as a coaching staff, prior coaching staffs have never taken advantage of it.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to actually finally get to some football too, like you were kind of saying with spring ball, to see how kind of this all shakes out. But yeah, recruiting's a 365 uh, day a year thing, and I think that Matt Rhule understands that. I mean, we talked about the Trev Alberts wanted a grinder, and Matt Rhule has proven to be that on the recruiting trail, and that's what you need. I mean, as important as it is to be a good football coach and to coach the X's and O's well and all that type of stuff, like scheme is not as important as finding talent and finding good players, and that is the lifeblood of any good college football coach. And so far, I'm extremely impressed with Matt Rhule, and I'm just excited to see kind of the X's and O's side of things and see how things go there. But you look at where they invest their resources. Quarterback, the offensive line, and speed. I mean, I feel like they understand what it takes to win. You need skilled players, you need good quarterbacks, and you have to win in the trenches. And I feel like they've got the right idea, and it's going to be fun to watch them try to execute their plan for rebuilding this program, or rebuild or reset or whatever. That's kind of become a topic for discussion, whether this is a total rebuild or.
Well, it's a good question. So, people have asked me this, and I'm in a couple Husker chats that have asked this, and I truthfully think that this is more of a rebuild because, I think the state of Nebraska and all the high schools in it were ignored by previous staffs, and I think there was a Texas pipeline that was also ignored by the previous staff, and I just think the recruiting part of it, and then of course the culture part of it in terms of working hard as a coaching staff and getting this Nebraska football program respectable again. I think that takes a lot of building. So I don't know if this would be a reset so much as a rebuild because I think we're building the foundation for bigger things to come. I mean, look at, we've hired, personnel and coaches from, the state of Florida, the state of Texas, and I truly do look at this as more of a rebuild because we're building the foundations, particularly in recruiting in other areas of the country where we've kind of either lost touch or not excelled in.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, and I mean, I don't have a problem using the word rebuild or whatever, but it's got to be a quick rebuild, and I think it's gonna be because this program was never as bad as it seemed under Scott Frost. I mean, in the talent level, the execution, and every little aspect, like every little. I mean, you talked about the little things. Well, Scott Frost, the Nebraska Cornhuskers under Scott Frost, never did the little things right. They couldn't. They couldn't execute on special teams. They couldn't make key tackles. They couldn't avoid penalties. They couldn't nutrition themselves right. I mean, it was just all the little things that weren't paid attention to that Matt Rhule is paying attention to, and I think that's going to make a huge difference this season. I mean, coaching matters. There's a reason why these coaches get paid $10 million a year. There's a reason Matt Rhule's getting paid $9 million a year, and it's not to go 5-7 next year. It's not to go 4-8 next year. It's to win 7, 8, 9 games. It's to get this team winning Big Ten West championships and getting to that 12-team playoff. And I think it's going to happen. I think it needs to happen right away. There's more than enough talent on this team to win 7 or 8 games with this schedule next season. And I've said it time and time again, but if Matt Rhule is worth it all, what we've paid for him to be the head coach, this team will be bowling next year.
I think that's a fair goal, especially when you look at the schedule too. I think it's one of the more friendlier ones, that we've had in recent years. But you said taking care of the little things, and that just made me think back to the 2021 season where we went 3-9, but we very could have easily gone bowling that year. And who knows if we went bowling in 2021, things may have worked out differently. But in any event, that 3-9 season just kind of, put the exclamation point on what you don't do when you're trying to win football games and, how not to close the deal. So, it doesn't take much. And I do think, there was, how do I want to say this? There was a solid foundation when Frost was here in terms of talent and athletes and things like that. I do think development was a part of it, but I don't think it was as bad as people are making it out to be. Nevertheless, you know, mistakes cost the program several winnable games throughout his tenure here, and ultimately, from a football standpoint, that's what did him in.
Yep, and I think just all those little things, and the development, all those things. Matt Rhule is going to knock it out of the park, I believe, with all that stuff. So, I think that the curse of Nebraska is going to be coming to an end in this torturous 5-year run that's just been a nightmare. Without bowl games and without wins. So hopefully that comes to an end. And, I feel like this 2023 recruiting class is a good place to start. We'll obviously have a ton of coverage with you in this 2024 class and spring ball. And we'll be doing some depth chart predictions and breaking down this roster moving forward. So make sure you guys are, subscribing to the channel. Make sure you like our videos, get into the comment section. Let us know what you think about this 2023 class or the chances of Nebraska, landing Dylan Raiola. Before we do wrap it up, I just wanted to touch on, obviously basketball had a tough loss earlier this week. The women got a good win last night, so they're keeping their hopes alive, 71-67. And then Nebraska will play Penn, Penn State on Sunday. So hopefully the Huskers can get a couple more wins and Fred can keep his job. But we'll have more reaction and thoughts on all that stuff on Monday. So make sure you subscribe. And as always, folks, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.